Mom told me to leave in the middle of holiday lunch. No warning, no argument, just a cold command delivered between clinking forks and fake smiles. One second I was passing the rolls, the next she was telling me to stop relying on the family as if I hadn't been quietly paying for nearly everything that kept that family standing. The room froze. No one defended me. Not my father, not my brothers. And in that silence, something inside me snapped, not in anger but in clarity, because if they truly believed I relied on them, they were about to learn just how wrong they'd been and what that mistake would cost. I didn't leave the house right away. I sat there for a moment, letting the warmth of the dining room lights wash over me, the way they used to when I was a kid before I understood what those lights really hid. From the outside, my family looks like the picture of holiday tradition, carved ham, decorative wreaths, laughter that sounds real if you don't listen too closely. But if you grow up inside those walls, you learn every crack in the paint, every shift in tone, every silence that means more than the words that came before it. My name is Valentina. I'm 42, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I showed up enough, if I proved myself enough, I finally earn a place at that table that didn't feel conditional. At work, I manage teams, deadlines, strategies. But at home, I'm the daughter who's too independent, the sister who's too successful, the relative who's both relied on and resented. My mother, Carol, has always held the emotional thermostat of the house. If she's warm, everyone relaxes. If she's cold, everyone tightens. Today, she was ice. My father, Carl, stared at his plate, rearranging his green beans like he hoped they'd form a shield. Stephen, my older brother, pretended to be engrossed in his phone, though the screen wasn't even lit. And Bobby, my younger brother, was smirking into his wine glass, half amused, half satisfied, like he'd been waiting years to watch me get pushed out of the spotlight. It wasn't lost on me that they'd all benefited from me quietly, consistently. When Stephen needed help with legal trouble, he called me. When Bobby couldn't cover Mason's tuition, I paid it. When my parents' bills kept creeping higher, I handled them without a word. I did it because I believed family should lift each other up. I did it because I didn't want them to suffer. But mostly, I did it because I hoped it would prove I belonged, even if the evidence always pointed the other way. Growing up, my mother used to say, strong women carry the family on their backs. I didn't realize she meant only one woman, and that woman was me. She never taught my brothers how to shoulder responsibility. She taught them how to hand it off. And they did, over and over, while I told myself this was love. But as I sat there absorbing the echo of her words, stop relying on the family, I felt something inside me reorder itself. The math didn't add up, and maybe it never had. I took a slow sip of water, letting the metallic taste settle on my tongue. Around me, conversations started again in forced, uneven bursts, like everyone was desperate to pretend nothing had happened. But something had, something irreversible. And as I watched them avoid my eyes, I realized this wasn't the beginning of a collapse. It was the beginning of clarity. The rest of the lunch felt like waiting for a storm everyone was pretending not to notice. You could hear it in the way forks tapped plates a little too fast, in the way my father's breathing hitched every time my mother shifted in her seat, in the way Bobby's knee bounced under the table like he was enjoying a private show. I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because silence has a way of showing you who people really are. Carol talked as if nothing had happened. She commented on the glaze of the ham, the temperature of the rolls, the neighbor's new fence. Not once did she look at me. That was her way. She didn't explode, she erased. And being erased by your own mother hits differently than any insult could. At one point, Stephen finally spoke. "Mom's right, Val," he muttered, eyes glued to his plate. "You've been distant." Maybe this is for the best. Distant. A word people use when they've forgotten the last 5 times you showed up for them. I didn't respond. I just watched him shift uncomfortably, like my silence was louder than anything I could have said back. Then Bobby chimed in, swirling his wine dramatically. "If you're struggling, just say that. No shame in needing help from them." I almost laughed. But before I could say anything, Carol cut in, again, her voice soft but razor sharp. "Valentina, sweetheart, we can't keep pretending everything is fine. You rely too much on this family. It's time for you to grow up." There it was, the full line, the one that would split everything open. Stop relying on the family. She'd said it earlier, but now she said it slowly, deliberately, like she wanted to carve each word into me. And the worst part wasn't what she said, it was the way the others let it land. No one pushed back. No one asked her to stop. Their silence wasn't confusion. It was agreement. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not snapped snap suggests chaos. This was clarity settling into place like a key clicking into a lock. I excused myself to the bathroom, not to hide, just to breathe. Inside the mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized. Not because she was older or tired, but because she finally understood the truth. I wasn't being pushed out of the family. I'd never truly been let in. When I returned to the table, they barely noticed. My chair scraped softly against the floor, but no one looked up. Not even my mother. That was my turning point. I picked up my coat, draping it over my arm. Carol finally glanced at me, but not with worry, with annoyance, like I was interrupting her moment. "Where are you going?" she asked. I met her eyes calm and steady. "Home." For a second, something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe even fear, before she shut it down. No one stopped me as I walked to the front door. They didn't understand yet, but they would. The cold air outside hit me with a clarity the dining room never could. I walked to my car without looking back, not out of pride, but because I didn't trust myself to give them even a final glance. They hadn't earned that. My hands were steady when I unlocked the door, steadier than they'd been in years. By the time I reached my apartment in the city, the numbness had worn off, replaced by something quieter, sharper resolve. The kind that doesn't come from anger, but from finally telling yourself the truth. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and let the silence settle. My home had always been my refuge, but that night it felt different. It felt like it was waiting for me to make a decision. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I walked to my bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began packing. Not to leave, just to mark the end of something. Folding clothes became symbolic. Every shirt, every pair of jeans felt like a line drawn. The zipper's soft hum was a reminder that I still had control, at least over myself. I packed with a calm, deliberate rhythm. No rush, no panic, just clarity. I opened my laptop next to the glow of the screen, lighting the room with a cold blue tint. One by one, I opened the tabs I'd avoided thinking about. Payments for my parents' utilities, bills for the cabin, tuition support, quiet contributions I'd made for years without asking for recognition. Seeing the totals collected in one place was like watching a lifetime spool out into numbers rounded simple, undeniable. I hovered over the auto-pay settings. Then I canceled them. Not out of spite, out of necessity. They'd told me to stop relying on the family. So I did, right then in the most literal, logical way possible. The cabin's maintenance came next. The gas, the water, the internet services I'd funded while never being invited up for holidays. A place they treated as theirs while I paid the bills. My fingers clicked through each account, ending what should never have begun. Cancel, cancel, cancel. Each confirmation email felt like an exhale I'd been holding for decades. But the final confirmation came when I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. The paperwork for the cabin transfer. My lawyer had insisted I include a reversion clause. At the time, I'd agreed because it felt prudent. Now it felt prophetic. If the property was ever contested, if my parents attempted to exclude me from decisions, if they acted against the terms in any way, ownership automatically reverted to me. No fight, no negotiation, just a simple legal consequence. I sat back in my chair, letting the reality settle. They thought they held the power. They thought I was the one who needed them. But the truth had always been the opposite. I closed the laptop, the room falling into darkness, except for the city lights outside. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preparation. Because the moment they realized what my silence truly meant, everything would shift, and I would be ready. 3 days passed before my phone rang, not with concern, not with apology, but with entitlement. Bobby's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring twice before answering, just long enough for him to feel the delay. "Val, what the hell did you do?" he barked, skipping any pretense of civility. "The cabin's freezing. The heat won't kick on and the internet's down. Mason was supposed to go up this weekend. Then he'll have to stay home," I said calmly. "What is your problem?" His voice cracked with disbelief, like I'd violated some unspoken agreement to keep enabling him forever. "I stopped paying for things I don't use," I replied. There was silence. Heavy, angry, confused. Then he launched into a tirade about family loyalty, responsibility, sacrifice. Funny how people use those words only when they want something from you. I let him finish, then said, "Only this. You told me to stop relying on the family." So I did. And then I hung up. The next call wasn't from Bobby. It wasn't from Stephen. It came from my father, a quiet, breathy voicemail asking if we could talk things out like adults. The tone was familiar, desperate, but disguised as reasonable. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what my absence cost them. 2 more days passed before it escalated. A heavy envelope landed in my mailbox. Legal seal. Return address from a law office in the city. Inside a petition, filed by my mother, requesting the court review the cabin transfer, claiming she'd been under emotional distress and hadn't understood the terms, requesting the property revert to her and my father. I sat at the kitchen island reading the papers in a silence so deep it almost buzzed. They hadn't even called first. They went straight to trying to take something that wasn't theirs, not by accident or confusion, but by choice. That was it. The moment the line stopped being blurry, I contacted my lawyer that afternoon. He skimmed the documents, exhaled through his nose, and shook his head. "They have no case," he said. "The reversion clause ensures ownership returns to you automatically if they act against the agreement. They filed this petition, which means they triggered the clause themselves. So the cabin is mine again, legally effective immediately." I thanked him. Not because I was happy, but because I finally felt certainty, something solid under my feet after years of bending and breaking for everyone else. When my lawyer suggested we schedule a meeting with them, I chose the diner near the old neighborhood, the one with peeling leather booths and humming lights, familiar enough to keep emotions grounded, public enough to ensure no one raised voices. They arrived together, Carol stiff with indignation, Carl avoiding eye contact, Stephen pale, Bobby fuming. I had already chosen a booth in the back. They slid in across from me like defendants entering a courtroom. My mother spoke first. "Valentina, this has gone on long enough. You've made your point." I studied her face. Not a trace of regret, only annoyance that her plan hadn't worked. "Mom," I said evenly, "I didn't file anything. You did." "That's because you blindsided us," she snapped. "Cutting off the cabin, the bills you can't expect us to." "I didn't expect anything," I said. "That's the difference between us." Her nostrils flared, but before she could interrupt, I placed a thick folder on the table. Not legal documents my own. 20 years of payments, rounded totals, printed lists of utilities, maintenance for their home tuition support repairs, medical bills. Evidence of every quiet sacrifice they'd chosen not to remember. "What's this?" Stephen asked, voice weak. "Everything I've covered since I was 22, I said. My father's eyes skimmed the first page and stopped. He blinked. "You paid this much?" "Yes." "For all of us," Stephen whispered. "Yes." Bobby scoffed, but it sounded shaky. "So what? You think you're some hero we never asked you to?" "No," I cut in my voice firm. "You expected it." A clear line fell across the table, the truth resting heavy on all of us. I continued calm but deliberate. Mom told me to stop relying on the family. So I did. I stopped paying the utilities. I stopped covering the cabin. I stopped funding the lifestyle you built on the assumption I'd never walk away. My mother stiffened. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said quietly. "I'm being fair." I slid another document forward, the reversion clause. "This is the legal agreement for the cabin. The moment you contested the ownership, everything reverted to me. Automatically. You didn't lose the cabin because of me. You lost it because you tried to take something that wasn't yours." My mother's face froze, and for the first time in my life, she looked afraid. Her face went blank, empty, like someone had pulled the script from her hands and left her standing wordless on stage. My father leaned back, stunned. Stephen stared at his hands. Bobby's mouth opened, then closed without sound. They weren't just shocked, they were unmasked. I let the silence sit long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Then I spoke softly, almost gently. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I should have drawn boundaries 20 years ago. You told me I relied on you, but you were relying on me. And now, you'll have to rely on yourselves. My mother found her voice at last. We're your family. I know I said. I loved you like family. I supported you like family. But you didn't treat me like one. I stood smoothing my coat. From my wallet, I pulled a single dollar, the symbolic inheritance that mirrored how they'd treated my contributions, small, ignorable, undervalued. I set it in the center of the table. That's all that remains, I said. Everything else I already gave. And you didn't even see it. No one moved. Not my father, not my brothers, not my mother whose blank stare flickered into something almost like regret too late. I stepped away from the booth. Valentina, my mother called, voice cracking just slightly. I paused just enough to hear it, but I didn't turn back. Some stories need a final line. This one needed a door closing. The diner bell rang softly as I left the cold air rushing in around me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for walking away. I felt free. In the days that followed, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the kind that comes from being shut out. It was the kind you earn after finally telling the truth out loud. My apartment seemed brighter somehow. The morning light hit the counter in soft stripes, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake up bracing for someone else's crisis. My lawyer confirmed the paperwork. The cabin was legally mine again. No dispute, no loophole, just a clean reversion triggered by their own choices. He asked if I wanted to pursue damages or file anything further. I didn't. Justice didn't need to be loud to be real. A week later, my father sent a short email, no Bible verses, no guilt, just a line saying they were figuring things out. I hoped they were. Maybe losing the support they took for granted would force them to grow in ways they hadn't needed to before. As for me, I took a long walk along the river that weekend, letting the winter air sting my cheeks. I felt lighter. Not because I'd won something, but because I'd finally put down a weight I was never meant to carry. I hadn't abandoned my family. I'd simply stopped abandoning myself. In time, maybe they'll understand why I drew the line. Maybe they won't. But I've learned that boundaries aren't punishments. They're invitations for people to meet you with the respect you've always given them. And if they can't, you walk forward anyway. My life is quieter now, steadier, finally my own. If this story echoes something in your life, share your thoughts below. And if you want more true family dramas and endings that finally make sense, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.